pleasure to be here and as co-director of CRESST, I'd like to welcome you all again. I am a statistician, psychometrician by training, and when I first read the Ford Commission report, very naturally I felt that there were certain things that, as self-reflections and as well as reflections on the field that I represent, statistics and educational measurement. So I would very much like to focus my very brief set of slides on the tools and tools makers for future educational assessments. So psychometrics, if we think about much of the technical work these days in educational assessment, a lot of it is psychometric in nature, or at least these work would employ psychometric methods in some manner. And much of classical and contemporary research on psychometrics is based on principles that we borrow from statistics, although we have also exported some very important notions to statistics, such as like numerics, computer science, and engineering, especially engineering. This is not surprising if you think about the historical context in which other subfields that carry the X metrics type of name, such as econometrics or biometrics, were developed out of their own fields. And when our eyes glaze over mountains of assessment data in large-scale settings, we look for simple answers from statistical analyses and hope, either correctly or erroneously, that these assessments, tasks, items may then be blessed by technical standards or indicators of quality. David Thyssen, in his 2000 presidential address, published subsequently in 2001 in Psychometrica, to the Psychometric Society, noted that the psychometricians study these tools, mathematics, statistics, computing, in order to actually build tools in order for others to study. And he advocated that we essentially treat the discipline as an engineering discipline in its most apparent nature. And I would argue that this characterization remains to a high degree of approximation, an accurate characterization given these ubiquitously tight assessment production timelines, sometimes not imposed by psychometricians, the often carefully engineered process to make and maintain educational assessments, and often the degree of commercialization. I would also argue that this current state of affairs, in light of the Commission report, is less than desirable in this time of growing pressure on the why, how, and what of educational assessment. Operational educational assessment as proper engineering problem generates very interesting applied research questions, and my estimate is if I go to NCME meeting every year, about half of the presentations or posters are on these very applied but important research questions. On the other hand, there are fundamental research and development occurring largely outside of the production, largely in academic or perhaps semi-academic settings, such as research labs or research divisions of places like ETS, that have had a bit more difficult time penetrating into operation. And there are certain things that we know as a field that would provide direct answers to some of the questions raised in the report, things that we understand that we know how to do efficiently enough for operational purposes, have largely remained in the next wave, as the next wave that never reaches the shore. These things include models that would provide more meaningful feedback as opposed to just a summative score at the end of the year, methods for ensuring comparability and adaptivity. At least as I understand, at least one of the large assessment consortia is doing work in that area, and accountability as well. But if you look at the engineering part of psychometrics, most of the engineering involves designing tools for data analysis and modeling. These tools can then be used directly in operation and not assigned to its own mostly kludgy one-time purpose type of tools. They require both broad conceptual frameworks, carefully designed and reusable templates, resources, and platforms that are implemented so that end users can learn and use them. I mentioned Darrell Bach here because he is an example of a true scientist and artist. He's a fantastic photographer that ventured into tools making first for himself and then his students to study, and then mostly for others. I could not imagine without the suite of tools that he and his colleagues have produced, the technical aspects of, at least the technical aspects of educational management would be very different. And then psychometricians that also do science, very occasionally that happens, L.L. Thurstone himself provided a great example with his 1927 work on law of comparative judgment, which is it's a minimalist model for it's a process theory model based on his principles, and then it also motivated a large part of item response theory, which is the bulk of current educational assessment methodologies. And more recently, Bob Misley and his colleagues' work on evidence-centered design, which is fundamentally based on recognition using principles from cognitive science. But when I think about this, either as work that I do myself or my colleagues' work, or in terms of thinking about student training, as a matter of fact, when folks go out and do these assessments, implement these assessments, they will, by that time, they would have gone through some graduate curriculum at the university. So as university faculty members, we have some obligation to think about this as well. Perhaps the students or ourselves not to become subject experts, but at least that we are well-versed enough with these major trends in understanding what problems are worth spending time on and what not. And the emphasis on assessment design that permeates throughout the Commission report highlights the reason why psychometricians cannot really sit idle and twiddle their thumbs until pilot testing data become available, and then just dump it on you, and then you're supposed to do something to it. Psychometricians really ought to work more productively with other team members, and not just be that numbers person at the end. Finally, I think it really is important to go back and revisit Thurstone's Psychometric Society presidential talk in 1937, that encouraging students to help build an integrated interpretation of mental phenomena, and we can generalize this to really psychometrics assessment on an experimental foundation that was old language for really data collection. Let us remember that the psychological theory is not good simply because it's cleverly mathematical, and that an experiment is not good just because it involves ingenious appraise, and that statistics are merely means for checking theory with experiment. And I think that both as a researcher in this field and as I think about training students down the road, that this is something that's worth remembering. And to finish up, I really just want to mention one anecdote. And in thinking about how assessment as we know it today and its connection to psychometrics in many ways have given the expectation that this is the technical work or methods, models that would develop largely to analyze multiple choice type of assessments were the root of evil. That may not be exactly right, and I was trained as a mathematician, so I will just prove by contradiction. I was in China just about 2 weeks ago, and there was very little psychometrics, and the reason I was there was to basically train the next cadre of psychometricians who could really engage in designing the national level assessment system, much like our NAEP, but doing a bit more because there's accountability attached to the system as well. There's very little psychometrics, but just maybe 2-3 days ago, 10 million high school graduating class, they took this national college entrance matriculation exam, and there was this one exam will determine whether they get into colleges or not, what colleges, and then, but it also has consequences for schools and teachers and the subject area instructors of the graduating class, because they will be ranked within their school, within their district, within their county, within their city, for how many students have sent to what kind of colleges. So it is a very high stakes, with lots of consequences kind of assessment. It is really only mandated by policy. There's very little psychometrics involved at all. And it really is not because of psychometrics that we got to that place in like what we're observing right now in China. And what was interesting is in talking to educational researchers and assessment researchers, especially in China, what they're looking at is they look at the United States as a great example, great counterexample of how not to do these kinds of very high stakes educational testing. And it is somewhat interesting to observe that they are looking at applications of psychometric principles as a way to essentially move that country away from this policy-mandated high-stakes testing and everybody teaching to that one test. We're not talking about teaching to end-of-year tests here in a way that is counterproductive, that over there, everybody's teaching the one test. I just think that's quite interesting of a comparison. So in the interest of time, I will stop right here.